I'm Michael F. Brown, President of the School for Advanced Research, speaking to you from my office in Santa Fe on our historic campus. I'm pleased to welcome you to this year's Linda CORDELL Memorial event, which is part of our Creative Thought Forum series. SAR, this year celebrating its 115th anniversary, promotes an understanding of human history and cultures through a unique combination of creative practice and scholarly research in Native American arts, anthropology, and related disciplines. For this webinar, we'll hear from three experts on ancient human footprints. Matthew Bennett, David Bustos, Vance Holliday are members of a scientific team that has recently published its research on ancient footprints discovered at White Sands National Park in southern New Mexico. These footprints place humans in North America millennia earlier than previously thought. We're grateful to the following Creative Thought Forum series sponsors for their support: the Pellohemo Foundation, Adobo Catering, the Flora Crichton Lecture Fund, Luke and Betty Vortman Endowment Fund, members of SAR's Founder Society, Newman's Own Foundation, and Thornburg Investment Management. This webinar, like many of our events, is made available free of charge thanks to the generous support of our members and donors, as well as the sponsors just mentioned. We greatly appreciate the voluntary donations made during registration for this event. If you'd like information on becoming an SAR member, please visit our website at members.sarweb.org. That's O-R-G. Now let me invite our panelists to turn on their microphones and their cameras, and I will introduce them. We got David on board. There he goes. Okay. Matthew Bennett is a professor of environmental and geographical sciences at Bournemouth University in the United Kingdom. He's published widely on aspects of glaciology, sedimentology, and geomorphology, as well as human footprint projects throughout the world. And he's staying up very late for us, which we appreciate. Matthew, there's a 7-hour time difference between here and the UK. Wildlife biologist David Bustos is the resource program manager at White Sands National Park and a graduate of New Mexico State University. He's responsible for the management of the park's cultural and natural resources and has investigated ancient human and megafauna footprints throughout the park for more than a decade. Vance Holliday is professor of anthropology and geosciences at the University of Arizona. He directs the Argonaut Archaeological Research Fund, AARF, which is devoted to research on the geoarchaeology of the Paleo-Indian peoples of the Southwest. His career is largely devoted to reconstructing and interpreting the landscapes and environments in which the first Americans lived and how these conditions evolved over time. So, David, I hand you the floor first.
Great. Thank you all for allowing us to speak with you today. I'm excited to share some of the slides about our fossil footprints. Let me pull those up now. Can you see those okay? Great. So yeah, so White Sands is an amazing place. If you've ever been there, you'll see it's snow white gypsum dunes. But today we'll talk to you a little bit about what it was like before the dunes, maybe the early onset of the dunes. So if you look on the map here, in the teal color, you can see there's just thousands and thousands of prints, basically everywhere within this teal area. There's thousands of footprints, and across White Sands National Park, that'd be across 80,000 acres. Anywhere you go in these areas, you'll find prints, and it's normally these 4 track makers. Most common are the mammoth and human prints, but we also have giant ground sloth and camel are also very common. Usually anywhere you find one of these track makers, you'll find a companion set of prints. The other thing I wanted to mention is, these are really incredible stories, and Matthew will talk more about some of the interactions and behaviors we get to see. But really, they're glimpses of time of many of the people that were once here. And we had a great opportunity to work with many of the tribes and pueblos from around these local areas. And it's really, this is their homeland, and their really amazing stories that have been left behind that we get to see. It's been a great honor and privilege to work with all of our tribal partners and from the pueblos and tribes. The other thing I wanted to start with is, I often joke, all good stories start with a story of Bigfoot, but at White Sands, basically, 1931, a government trapper was coming across the Lake Otero, so crossing this large basin, and he came across these amazing prints. He described them being 22 inches across and 8 inches wide. At that time, they thought, well, maybe they were prints of a Bigfoot, so they actually set out to look for Bigfoot. They didn't find the Bigfoot, but most recently, we found out that those prints were actually the prints of a giant ground sloth. So when we measured the prints, they were 22 inches across and 8 inches wide. Later on, in 2006, we found prints throughout the park, as after a large flood. It started at Lake Lucero. And since that time, we've been finding prints everywhere throughout the park. 2009, we began to find prints that looked elongated, possibly human prints. And around 2017, with the help of Matthew and really amazing Tim, we were able to confirm that they were human and also contemporaneous with many of the Pleistocene megafauna. In this image, you can see some of the most recent megafauna prints we've found to date. The bear have been some of the most recent, just a few months back. And we also just did find a horse last week. I had a chance to add those images in. But we just found horse, but we're also finding prints of canines, so dog-like prints or wolf, and felid or large cat prints. Giant ground sloth, you can see these really amazing claw prints. And then also camels and proboscidean mammoth or mastodon. From the stride and gait, it looks like most likely there'd be mammoth in much of the park, but there could be mastodon. They found them nearby in the missile range as well. And then most recently are the human prints. One thing I wanted to point out to folks is the prints at White Sands. We have about 5 or 6 different types as you go across the basin. And everywhere across this basin, so this would be Lake Otero, as you're going across and dropping down Lake Otero, there's a series of elevation changes. And at each of these different elevation changes, you get a series of different print types. So if you look at the lowest elevation, at these prints right here, you'll have a very coarse grain sand that infills a finer grain around it. And then there's a slip or a little cap on top of those prints. So those prints, they come and go with soil moisture. So do the prints, our number 4 type prints, those will also come and go with soil moisture. And so, what's I think important about this is at each of these elevations, the environment was just right to have the same type of print. So basically right here, you have human prints and then you have megafauna prints, but the conditions in the environment had to be just right that both of these prints formed at the same time. If you walk by this area today, your prints will disappear, and a few months later, these prints will pop right back up as long as you don't disturb the subsurface. The next print we have are dolomite. So we have dolomite prints of mammoth and camel and giant ground sloth. All the track makers are in these different print types. The next step is you go up sort of in elevation. We have very fine grain prints, and again, those are infilled, but this time it's more of a little bit more coarse, but also a pale white color gypsum. So these are also gypsum grains or sand, but it's a little bit pale, where this area right here in print type 6, those are very coarse grain, and they're also more gray in nature, a little bit darker. Both of these have a slip on top of them. And these are the prints, when you brush them out, they reveal really incredible toe and foot morphologies can be seen. The next prints we have, they're infilled with material, maybe a coarse or fine grain material. The outside is much, much finer, but there's no cap on top of them. And then the other prints they're not infilled at all. It's sort of just an open print. So right here, you can see a human print inside a mammoth print. And then again, there's a larger mammoth print. And then the last prints we have at the highest elevation, moving up along the eastern lake margins, we have clay prints. So right here, you can see one of the clay prints. So these are some of the human prints. And then these are the mammoth prints. Unfortunately, these are the most fragile. As they dry, they can often disappear in just a few months, sometimes a year or less. The trackways will disappear completely. These tracks right here, they're completely gone after 2 years. And also these prints right here, I think there's only maybe one print that's badly eroded that remains, but for the most part, all these prints are gone. So we're losing hundreds of prints in many areas, and hundreds and hundreds of acres are being eroded. And with that, we're seeing a loss of prints. I'll show more slides in a little while. One of the important things about white sands, we might not have some of the oldest prints in the world, but the stories they tell are really incredible. And what makes the prints, I think, so amazing is there's a great number that are preserved. There's literally thousands and thousands of prints, tens of thousands across 80,000 acres. But with that, you get to see so many incredible stories of different animals and people interacting with each other, and people interacting, and other, just so many incredible stories. The other really amazing thing is you often see track makers of children and adults, and the same thing, you'll see track makers of adult animals and juvenile animals. So you'll see, a mammoth and then a baby mammoth right next to it. The adult will just be walking in a straight line. The baby will be going in circles, maybe nudging up against, the mother, maybe the nurse or something, and going off and coming back. Same thing with the giant ground sloth. You'll see them both juvenile and adult. So it looks like there's family groups in these areas. Here's what it looks like out on the flat. So that's that one area where there's just thousands of prints. And what's also really interesting is these prints, even if you step on them, they're in the subsurface, so they'll come back where your modern print will disappear. So this was taken from last week, but the prints I showed just a second ago, those were taken from about 4 years ago. So these prints, as long as you don't disturb the top layer, that they'll last for a very long time. But once they're exposed, then they rapidly erode away. The other thing that's really important about the trackways at White Sands is they're of great distance. And because they're so long, you'll get to see really incredible interactions. And that's what some of the information that Matthew will speak about in a little while. But some of our trackways go for over 2 miles. So just really extreme lengths that can be seen. Because they're so long, you often get to see many interactions where the animals step back and forth on top of each other, and the people cross-cut the animal prints, and the animals cross-cut the people prints. Again, here's a short little video. These are some prints that were brushed out. So you can see really amazing toes as they're slipping in the mud. And then on the other side, you can see where a person put the child down, it looks like, and picked them up again. But there's just so many incredible stories like that throughout the park. Right here, you can see some of the toddler prints. Unfortunately, though, many of these prints are rapidly eroding. As this area is drying, ongoing drought, some of the long-term drought, and possibly climate change, we're seeing a loss of soil moisture. And with that loss of soil moisture, we're seeing rapid erosion, large-scale erosion. So this is just an example from after a large drought in 2008. The ground became very, very dry and hot as well. And so this is March 10th, and you can see March 14th of 2008, after a large windstorm, just a massive plume of dust. So this actually picks up all the sediment from White Sands and on top of these trackway areas, and it carried it all the way to Oklahoma and Texas beyond. So, possibly tons of sediment were lost. And as that happens, then the prints are exposed, and we're seeing rapid erosion of those prints. This is just a blow up image of it, so you can see right here. This is Lake Lucero, and then this is the all of Lake Otero. Just a massive amount of sediment is being eroded away as the sediment dries and is carried away. So if you've never been to White Sands, there's a good chance White Sands has visited you in the past. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I think one of the common thoughts is, well, does it really matter so much if you lose one layer? There's another layer, another layer, another layer. And on our eastern margins, that's definitely is the case. We have these amazing layers in some places, over 11 different stratified layers. And at each of these layers, you'll see fossil footprints of people and megafauna over and over and over again. Many of these seed layers and trackway layers, they'll extend for miles on that eastern margins. And what's really incredible also, if you look closely, you can see some of the mammoth cross-cutting this trench. So this is about a meter above some of the human footprints. And further down, there's places where this track would be almost 2 meters above. So, just a really amazing record of time also, just looking at the soil stratigraphy. You can see here, so, and that's common over and over, and you'll see megafauna prints with the human prints at all of these different layers. So on the eastern margin, there are many layers. So as one layer erodes, another layer will pop out, but unfortunately they are rapidly being lost. But the real concern is on the floor of the basin. So on the floor of the basin, there's a very finite number of prints. In most places, you only have one layer of prints, and it's only about 8 to 12 inches in most places. Once you lose that layer of sediment, they'll be lost forever and you'll never see them again. So it really is a race to try to recover them as quickly as we can. Again, here's an example. This is a benchmark from 1960, about 14 to 18 inches of sediment loss. And so once that sediment is lost, then you can see here's where there is still sand and sediment covering the prints. Here's a recent area where the prints were exposed. And then just over from this area, further sediment loss, you can see all the prints are gone. So there was prints here and there's no longer any prints here. If you look at the base of this plant, you can see the root zone is being exposed. So just large scale erosion of the sediment. And then again, is 2009 and 2011. So just rapid loss of these really incredible trackways that we found, and just a few years later, completely gone. So, there's to try to preserve these prints, we're trying to understand what's going on and being able to predict what areas are eroding the quickest, so we can get out as quickly as we can to try to document them before they're gone. Using satellite imagery, we were able to look and compare soil moisture and temperature over time. And as you do that, you can start to see areas of increased erodibility or where the sediment is drying. And that's been very helpful to try to predict what areas we might want to be focusing our energy and really seeing what areas are seeing the greatest loss in the shortest amount of time. And the other thing that we're doing is putting a series of weather stations and monitoring stations so we can look at soil moisture and temperature to also see when the prints are most easy to see. Some of the prints that rely on soil moisture to see, you can start to get a sense of when is the best time to see those prints, but then also see what kind of conditions are leading to the rapid erosion of the prints. And then the other thing that we've been doing is using LiDAR to create digital elevation maps. And from the digital elevation maps, you can do change analysis. So you can compare different years and see how much erosion is happening from one year to the next year. With the LiDAR and then also with the high resolution imagery, you can also locate many of these prints. So right here, you can see an area that was recently exposed where the sand, you can see right here, has been blown off, and all these new prints are being exposed. Many mammoth prints and maybe some camel prints, possibly some human prints out in this area. So this area was recently exposed. So now we'll go out and try to capture those prints and document them as quickly as we can. The way that we capture or document most of these prints to preserve them is by photogrammetry. So we've done photogrammetry and some laser scanning, but photogrammetry has really been a great tool for this. So basically, this is just an overlapping set of photos. Sometimes 400 or 500 photos or more. These series of photos, you can make an orthomosaic, so get a really high resolution image. And then you can also make an exact 3D replica. So even after the prints are gone, years later, you can print out these replicas, and so you can study them further, and then also share them with the public and learn more from these areas. So that's been one of the best ways we have right now to preserve them. One of the reasons why is because the prints are spread out across 80,000 acres. So there's no way to preserve an area that's so vast. So we're just trying to get out as quickly as we can and document and preserve them before they're gone. And then the last part of our story, there's just so many amazing prints and really amazing things to see and to share with the public. So we've been working closely with many of our tribal partners and from the pueblos and the tribes to develop new information that we can share with the public. And that's been a really great honor and privilege. Many of these groups, they actually have names for some of the megafauna in their own native languages. So that's been really amazing to hear. And some folks, it sounds like they also have oral histories of many of these megafauna. So it's just been a really incredible experience. But these will be some of the newest wayside exhibits that we're developing for the megafauna prints that we're finding, and some of the people prints that we're finding along with the megafauna as well. And then I just wanted to thank everybody that's been able to help us along the years. We have a small resource team at White Sands. The team's growing, but we've had so much incredible support from our regional staff in the Washington office and our research team, Matthew and Tommy Irvin and USGS, Kathleen Springer and Jeff Bugatti and so many others. Many of our tribal partners also have taken the time to come out and visit with us and help with site monitoring and consultation and other work over the years. So just wanted to thank all of them as well, and all of our interns and students over the years. So thank you all so much, and I'll turn the talk over to Matthew.
Hello, I hope you can see the slides. My colleagues are going to nod, I hope. Can you see the slides? Thank you, Vance. Okay, so hello from the UK, where it's quite late at night now. What I'm going to talk about is my contribution to this amazing team that David has put together. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that. I'm going to focus on the footprints, and also discuss the work we've done at this particular locality that we've been able to date. So David is an amazing person, absolutely amazing. And he's the guy that really took a lot of stick to start with in the early years about whether or not there were human footprints at White Sands, but he stuck with it, and he assembled what is an amazing team from Cornell, from Washington, from the USGS, that have come together to explore and study this phenomenal track site. And it really is a phenomenal track site. Now, myself, well, I'm a footprint expert. I've done all sorts of things in what is now getting on for 30 years of research. But through much of the last 20 years, I've focused on fossil footprints in various places. And I've translated a lot of that work into forensic science. I'm a geographer really by training, but also a geologist and a human ethnologist. So that's sort of my speciality. And I think it's worth just stopping for a moment and thinking about what footprints can actually tell us about the past. So the first thing is, you go back to the 1970s when Mary Leakey discovered the Lutuli footprints in northern Tanzania, and caused an amazing stir at the time. But footprints were thought to be 3 acts of geological preservation, something that happened very, very rarely. But over the years, the number of discoveries of footprint sites has really accelerated, as the graph here demonstrates. Part of that really was a game changer was the ability to capture those footprints in 3 dimensions, as David has mentioned, using first optical scanning, but more recently photogrammetry. But it's the computational, the maths, the statistics that you can bring to bear on those footprints that have really been the game changer, what I would refer to as computational technology. And of course, as you get increased awareness, you get increased discovery, and it's an accelerating process. The more footprints that we find, the more discoveries there will be. And only this summer, we've got an amazing set of footprints came to light in Utah, very similar to those at White Sands. So rapid growth in the discipline. Now, in terms of what they can tell us, depends a little bit on the size of the site. A lot of footprint sites until White Sands came along were relatively small. And really, you can't say much about them other than, hey, there were humans or a particular type of other animal there. When you go into the slightly larger sites, you get enough of a sample to start working out, what the age profile of the track makers was, or maybe some basic biometrics. But you really need a mega track site, a large track site, to really begin to really see the power of footprints. And White Sands is the largest concentration of footprints so far discovered in the Americas, and I would argue potentially in the world. It is truly amazing in terms of the scale and density of footprints. So they can tell us about presence. They can tell us about the activities that were taking place. They can show us something about the faunal associations, the ecological interactions, walking speed, biomechanics. We can work out the minimum number of track makers, their stature, weight, sex, and also their age profile. So there's a lot of information there, and it's rich. And it's something that connects people to the past. We've all made footprints at some point, whether walking on the beach or simply climbing out of the shower and leaving wet footprints on the tile. We've all made footprints. We can all connect to footprints in a way that perhaps you can't connect as well, dare I say it, given that there are archaeologists present, to a stone tool, because very few of us have actually made stone tools, but we've all made footprints. Now, it's the behavioral ecology that I think is really fun and makes White Sands very, very special. It's the interaction of different animals that allow us to tell these amazing stories. These stories of, the tribal and pueblo ancestors, and their input to these stories is really, really important. I'm going to talk just a couple of examples. Back a few years ago now, we introduced a story around the stalking of a sloth. So in the central picture, you can see this sort of hook-shaped characteristic of a sloth track. And in the middle, there's a human track just sitting in there. And stride for stride, the human was stepping in the tracks of the sloth. And as you go forward and you trace that forward, there's an interaction that can only be described as a confrontation, really, between the giant ground sloth and the humans. Now, some German and French television producers, under the direction of the sloth expert Craig McDonald, produced this rather colourful and rather dramatic, it's going to wake you up, I promise you, reenactment of what we could read in. And that story, that piece of animation brings to life something that you can read in the ground on those footprints. And those footprints are on the surface that David identifies as being finite and under immense threat. David's already touched slightly on this story, but the other piece of work that we brought out just shortly after that was one of the longest trackways anywhere in the world, really. And it's a double trackway. It's got an outward journey. So there's David standing there taking photographs, and it goes out this direction. And then parallel, the same individual, or if not the same individual, somebody of identical size and stature, walked back. And they were in a hurry. And unlike many of the trackways at the site, they form a straight line. And they tell a story. They tell a story of an individual carrying a child. And occasionally, and David's already shown you a nice little video of this, of a child being periodically put down. We can all equate, or many of us can empathize with a parent or a guardian of some description carrying a child on the hip, getting tired, putting that child down, readjusting and picking up and carrying on. And they're an amazing sort of insight into the past. But the reason that I like this trackway so much is that it's the interaction with megafauna that really makes it special. So on the left-hand panel, right-hand panel here, you can see a line of trackway heading northwards. And then afterwards, a very large bull mammoth stepped, and sediment was squidgy, soft and squelchy, and it deformed and clothed these footprints that came afterwards. And then on the return journey, the individual then stepped over and onto these prints. So you've got this clear bracketing between the human footprints and the extinct megafauna. We can see it also in the case of this sloth interaction. So again, we've got our double trackway, the outward journey here, and then the return journey on this side. So after the person had gone in this direction, the sloth comes along here, and it clearly sensed something. It must have scented the individual, because it rises up on its rear feet. It does this sort of twirling dance almost, obviously reaching up, sensing the air, saying, "Oh, I can smell human," or something like that, and then crashes back down and off it goes. And then sometime later, the human then walks back over the top. Again, it's the interaction. And this places the footprint in the terminal Pleistocene, because, you know, ground sloth and mammoth became extinct in these parts of Americas at that time. And for me, those interactions is where it's fun. But you know what? American archaeologists and anthropologists, and I can say this as an outsider, are obsessed by the age of things. How old? Is it Clovis? Is it pre-Clovis? Is it the oldest? And it is, quite frankly, a bit of an obsession. And in 2019, David and I realized that we had an opportunity to actually date the tracks. And it was with some trepidation and a sinking heart, I have to say, that we decided that we would have to face that and set about dating them. And we did so at this site at Locality 2. And we started that work in January 2020. And the work on dating the tracks is led by two amazing geologists. And I mean, they are absolutely amazing. Kathleen Springer and Jeff Pagati. They are the most meticulous, the most careful, the most systematic geochronologists that I've ever had the privilege of working with. They are amazing. And their diligence and industry have really brought forward the dating. Much of what I'm going to say is really their work, and they are truly amazing. So in the base of the trenches that we dug in 2020, you get a whole series of footprints in the bottom, and they're good footprints. You know, you're not going to find something absolutely perfect all the time, because people walking in mud and squelching and squidging and sliding. But these footprints are remarkably good, and they're in the base of the trench. And you can go and see how they're at depth. There's a series of footprints. We can see how surfaces have been deformed by mammoth tracks and then more footprints on top. And they're in good stratigraphic sequence. And we can analyze those, we can understand. Now, so far our sample of tracks down here at depth is relatively modest. And in time, it's no doubt going to get larger. So how do we date them? Well, between those horizons, we have seed layers. And this is seed layers by this common ditch grass. And I emphasize that they are seed layers. They're not dating balls of seeds or anything like that. We're dating in situ layers of seed lying on distinct stratigraphic horizons. And when you trench it out, you document it really carefully, and that's where the real skill comes from Jeff and Kathleen in their work. We can work out the different ages between these different footprint horizons. And we get dates that stretch from around 22 to 21,000 years ago. And sort of over 2 millennia of the visitation to the site, 600 generations, I think, near enough. And of course, each of those horizons tells its story about the track makers. We can work out the minimum number of individuals there, the animal tracks that are present, something about the stature, the age profile, and so forth. Now, we can build a better picture of that community as in the future, with the blessing of the tribes and pueblos affiliated to White Sands, we can try and have a better understanding of those group structures. But for now, there seems to be an awful lot of young people at the site. So we continue to work here. In January 2022, we did a little bit more work, well, a lot more work, and that'll be forthcoming in the fullness of time. These things take time to bring to publication to the quality that we're trying to aspire to. So what I would say is that White Sands, it has immense potential. As I say, it's the largest concentration of Ice Age tracks anywhere in the Americas so far. But so does every other dried lake bed or playa in the American Southwest. And there are lots of them. And that archive is awaiting for us to go out there and discover and to track the footfall of American ancestors. And ichnology has and is undergoing a continuing revolution. And we now have the tools to really unlock that archive and make a real difference. And ichnology impacts through conservation, education, and forensic science, because you can translate what we learn at sites like this into forensic practice, which is one of the things that I do. And in the words of Daniel Taylor, turning the legends to serious inquiry of footprints. Stories do not make footprints. Thus, if footprints exist, the maker of those footprints must also exist. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Vance.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my story here. Oops, there we go. Okay, does that look good? You can hear me? Okay, great, thank you. As Michael mentioned earlier, I have a longstanding interest in Paleo-Indian archaeology, understanding the peopling of the New World. And when I arrived here 20 years ago at the University of Arizona, started focusing my research in the Southwest. One of my interests was in ancient lake basins. There were a series of large lakes scattered throughout the Southwest. Here, most of them in New Mexico, a few in Arizona, and in Mexico, over 100 in the Great Basin off to the west. And I started focusing my research largely in New Mexico because I knew there was an archaeological, Paleo-Indian archaeological record to go with the lakes, and I was interested in understanding this. Never thought I would get to work in the Tularosa Basin because most of it's owned by the US military. But by happenstance in 2012, I was invited to look at some tracks in the park in White Sands. And that's when I first met David. And they turned out to be giant ground sloth, not humans, but that was my entree to working in the park. And it's been a remarkable experience for a whole variety of reasons for over 10 years now, working there on the archaeological record and the geological record, and culminating with this astonishing discovery that Matthew and David have been talking about. One thing I'll second what Matthew was saying about David. I certainly owe, we all owe David a great debt for his pushing this research. He was already working on this when I first met him, when I first was out there in 2012. And his persistence and hard work has paid off spectacularly. And I can't say enough about that, again, to second what Matthew was saying. So we wouldn't be here talking about this if it wasn't for David. So this gets us then into the discussion of the earliest peopling of the Americas. This has been a debate, well, forever, since people started asking questions about when humans arrived, going back several centuries. And then more recently, talking in the context of Clovis archaeology, so-called Clovis archaeology. As most of you know, a lot of Paleo-Indian archaeology is focused around stone tools, because that's in 99.9% of the cases, that's mostly what we have to work with, is the stone tools. And it helps that we see some spectacular artifacts. The tool making abilities of the first Americans is really quite remarkable. And for many, many years, for decades, the thinking was that Clovis was the earliest. They were certainly the oldest, easily recognized, well-dated, obvious artifact style, with these stereotypical points you see on the left of the screen there. Some of the very first ones from the Clovis type site. And Clovis was recognized by the 1950s as the earliest well-recognized assemblage. There's also artifact assemblage that's called Western Stemmed in the Great Basin that are probably some as old as Clovis. But then this raised the question of immediately, of course, was there anybody here before Clovis? And that debate's been going on since the 1950s. And it's a endless debate, acrimonious debate at times. There are good reasons why this is that I won't get into. This debate persists, but it is one of the great debates in American archaeology. And also, we're dealing with the last major human migration in human prehistory, the peopling of the Americas, much later, of course, than in Europe and elsewhere. Well, why is this a big debate, or what's the source of the debate? Why can't we just go out and identify these sites? Well, first of all, there's an issue of, is the site an archaeological site? Is it a place where people lived and we can see the evidence of that? And a lot of the debate is over dealing with broken stones and broken bones. And so you see papers with diagrams such as this. This is bone assemblage. The Cerruti site in California is very controversial, and people spending a lot of time, and with reason, but spending a lot of time trying to make an argument that these bones were broken by people, not by some natural forces. And the same thing, you see illustrations like this, very detailed look at stone tools or stone, and making arguments that yes, these stones were broken by people, not by natural processes. And the bigger issue is that you have to have unequivocal evidence if you're going to start pushing or changing paradigms about when modern humans arrived across the Pacific. It's got to be unequivocal. And that's where a lot of the debate is. And then associated with that is the whole issue of how old is it? Is it really older than Clovis? And there are endless debates about association. You can have dates and then you can have archaeological evidence, but you have to link them. And you have to have accurate dating methods. And this is an example from Cooper's Ferry. I'm not going to go into the debate, but there's the site's probably at least 14,000 years old, but there's some debate whether it might be even older. And so these are the kinds of debates that go on. Now, what we've got at White Sands, locality 2, as you have now seen from David and Matthew, unequivocal evidence of people walking around. For me, that has been a tremendous relief. We don't have to argue about broken stones or broken bones. Human footprints, unequivocal. There's no doubt, lots of them. It's astonishing to see this on top of this astonishing record of megafauna as well. And then the dating, we've got these spectacular geoscientists, geochronologists on the team, this remarkable team that Matthew was talking about, dating these seeds, and lots of seeds, as you saw in David's, in Matthew's photograph, and lots of levels of seeds in and associated with the tracks. And so we have this spectacular radiocarbon sequence and so we have direct association of the tracks with the dating. So a lot of the issues that normally come up just simply don't come up. And for a whole variety of reasons, we're quite confident of the dating accuracy, that the dating is solid. So we have White Sands locality 2 dating between 22,000, 21,000 and about 23,000 years. Now, there are a whole bunch of reasons why that's significant. It's older than most sites. Here's a map. I picked a few sites, pre-Clovis sites or older than Clovis sites, whatever you want to call them, from North America. You could ask 10 archaeologists that follow this debate to come up with a list of the sites that they accept as pre-Clovis, and I guarantee you're going to get 10 different lists. This is my list, my hit parade of sites, and you can see the basic age range, 14,000, 15,000 for a number of them, a few older. White Sands down here, the oldest in this group, and there are other sites, but I think these are probably the best cases in North America. This is particularly significant because the White Sands locality is the same age as the glaciers, the maximum extent of glaciers across North America. As most of you are probably aware, you've had these cycles of ice growth and decay, and 23 to 25,000 is when you had the last cycle of ice growth, and you had glaciers essentially from coast to coast covering all of Canada. This is a generalized map, but it shows you the ice coverage. There was an ice sheet over the Canadian Rockies, smaller one, and then a large one, and they would grow and merge and completely cover Canada for a while. And this is a map at probably right at the end of the age range, for the end as far as we know it, for the White Sands locality. And so that site is very clearly occupied by humans at the same time that the part of the continent is completely covered. So that raises a lot of questions about how did people get to New Mexico and when relative to this situation? Did they manage to skirt around the ice? That would require boating all along the ice front from way out in the Aleutians around across what's now the Canadian coastline. You'd have to be in a boat essentially all the way to Seattle. That's an argument. Or there people have argued that this actually wasn't an impediment, this glacial ice, that people do it today. They survive crossing glaciers that you might be able to get through. That's a debate that will go on. Or the other possibility, of course, is that people were here before the ice fully covered the continent. in my last slide here. This is a textbook illustration showing the peopling of the Americas as the ice sheet shrank. And when Clovis arrived and the other groups arrived, showing various routes through the glaciers as they retreated or around the glaciers. But you can also work this the other way, because the glaciers grew out of these centers. So 100,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, there was essentially no glacial ice covering Canada. But then as climate change, you started growing the glaciers and sea level started going down. But there was probably some several tens of thousands of years when you could get from Asia into the Americas and get around or through the glaciers before the last glacial maximum. So this is an argument that we've put out that possibly we're seeing a population that had been in place for some time, which makes the whole issue of the peopling of the New World, pushes it back even farther. So, I mean, the site is so significant for so many reasons. And this is yet another one of the reasons why we're interested in it, is because it raises all sorts of additional questions about the peopling of the Americas. So with that, I will finish and thank everybody for your attention, and hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, gentlemen. Wow, I've learned a lot. I'm sure that our audience feels the same way. Let me ask a quick question to David. You mentioned your concern about the loss of these prints through natural processes, but what about, do you have to manage people at the park so that they don't damage these, these amazing resources?
No, not so much. Fortunately, it's good and bad. So White Sands basically sits in the middle of White Sands Missile Range. And because we're in the middle of White Sands Missile Range, the back half of the park, there's been a number of missiles and other debris that have gone down over the years. So the back half of the park is called the co-use area. And it's off limits to the public because there is a lot of unexploded ordnance. So it'd be hazardous for folks to go out there if they don't know the safe sort of areas to go to, or how to go to those areas. So for that reason, the public can't currently access. So we don't have to manage that part necessarily. It's just the natural erosion. But we do want people to be able to enjoy and then see the prints. So we are going to be working, trying to make some replicas and signage and other things that people can see up front in the safe areas to view them and to enjoy them.
Thank you. I would imagine that unexploded ordnance is a significant deterrent to the public.
Yes.
We've got some great questions that have come in. One from Henry. Do the different elevations have any correspondence to the time of deposition, or are they completely independent?
Matthew or Vance, you want to handle that one?
I'm not sure exactly what they're getting at.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as I understand the question, David's diet cross section showed different elevations, right, and different geologies.
Got
it. Do those correlate with when the tracks were deposited, or are they just completely different areas? People from different.
So let me take that.
Okay.
At locality 2, there's a stratified sequence of footprint layers. So, and the youngest layers have the youngest states at the top, as you would expect, and the oldest layers have the oldest states. And it's in a beautiful stratigraphic order, amazing stratigraphy. That is one of the strengths of the geochronology. If the question is referring to David's wonderful, the Karen Carr picture of the animals at different levels, that is a piece of paleo art to help introduce the idea that each level is an occupation level or visitation level, correct? And that people visited at those different levels. So I hope that addresses the question.
I think so.
I should mention too, just to clarify, during the late Pleistocene, this was a huge lake basin, Paleo Lake Otero, and then erosion through the last 10 to 15,000 years has removed a lot of those lake beds to form the dunes. So you have the basin with the large flat area where a lot of the early tracks were found. Some of the ones that you just saw on the slides were exposed out on the eroded basin floor. And then where locality 2 is where the sediment has not yet been eroded. And so you've got two parts of the story: the eroded tracks out on the basin floor, and then the tracks that are yet to be eroded and that we're working on the margins that haven't been eroded. So that's some paleogeography to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. We've got an anonymous question. When human prints are found, is there a way to know what the people were doing when they made the prints? Well, you made some references to that. I guess that's Matthew's bailiwick. Do you want to say something about that?
I think one of the challenges is at White Satins, over the flat, vast areas, there's an awful lot of prints, and there's lots of different stories. We have stories and examples of children playing in puddles and made by giant sloths, and the sloths have gone past, and then there's these small kids jumping and leaving. It's wonderful little stories. So they were just playing like kids would play. In another place, we've got an example of, again, kids jumping from mammoth track to mammoth track, almost like jumping between targets. And we've got the example of the stalking of the giant sloth. So we have these sorts of activity stories. I think one of the key things is that we don't know that all of these footprints date from the same age as a locality 2, because footprint on a muddy surface, footprints are made at different levels and at different times. And we're only confident about the dating of tracks at locality 2. At all the other sites, we can bracket them by their interaction with extinct megafauna to the terminal Pleistocene. It's at locality 2 that we can date them. And at the moment, locality 2 is quite small because it's very invasive to dig these trenches. And we've got to be mindful of the need to be sensitive to the cultural heritage here. We do the minimum amount of excavation. Now, in time, and with the blessing of the tribes and pueblos affiliated to the park, we might extend those surfaces. But these are large endeavors. There's a lot of earth to be moved, and it's got to be moved systematically by hand and brushed away literally over time. And then in time, we might have a better idea of what people were doing. At the moment, a lot of it is about presence. And so, you know, we have different types of story in different locations, some securely dated, some dated really by what geologists would call biostratigraphy, by their association with extinct animals.
Though that raises an interesting question. I don't recall that you all mentioned anything about other kinds of depositions, fire pits, lithics, you know, other artifacts. Is that just not part of what you're looking at? You just haven't come across any?
Think about at this moment in time, the answer is no. We have chased a number of possible pathways out. And if you go younger in the record, there is classic archaeology in terms of and some rather advanced would be better qualified, but fragmentary and stone tools, you know, fragments. But I think the thing is that that's to be shot. That's to be targeted in the future, because as we get a better understanding of the typical movements of people backwards and forwards, so the general depositional environment is that there was once a lake. The lake goes down because the climate was drying, and the footprints were made. And as the shores become seasonally wet and seasonally dry, the footprints were deposited. And that's a general sort of setting. And, as we get a better understanding of where some of these people were heading, are they heading in common directions? That will allow us in time, and it is a matter of time, to identify targets for more, perhaps some would say, conventional archaeology, where you go down and you actually target classical archaeological artifacts and remains. But that is for the future.
If I could add one other thing, this is a common question. Keep in mind too, how long does it take to create a track? You're talking seconds in some cases. So as opposed to people staying in one place for a while, living, cooking, even overnight, you're talking about hours. But the tracks that we've illustrated, that they've documented so well, each one of those tracks, it's literally a snapshot. So you're reducing the likelihood that somebody's going to drop an artifact. Never mind the fact that they probably aren't going to want to leave a nice tool behind out in the middle of the lake basin if they know they dropped it, but that's another story.
So Vance, is it fair to conclude that these populations were likely such mobile hunters that they're finding artifact scatters would be a lot harder than it would be, as Matthew pointed out, in more recent depositions?
Oh, yeah. They're certainly hunter-gatherers, no doubt.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So here's a question from Stephen. I'm going to shorten a little bit. Do your tribal contacts and the conversations you have with them change or affect your interpretations of what you're looking at all? Are there specific ways in which that's changed the story in a certain sense?
I mean, David is best qualified to talk about this because he is the person that liaises with them on a daily basis. But the conversations that I've had with site monitors on site have profoundly affected the way I think about the site and the way that I interpret the tracks and think about the characteristics. Excuse me, there's a fox sounding out to the moon side, if you can hear something in the background. It is amazing, and it really had a profound impact on my view of the site and how I think about it and how I interpret the sites. And we're at the start of a journey that we want to deepen and strengthen our links with the tribes and the pueblos, because they have so much to offer the investigation here, and we welcome this. And David is lead on this and can probably say more.
Yeah, I think it's been really great, and I think they have. It's been really great to discuss with them, and they've had some really great information that they have shared. And we'll be working on some of the other marks and stuff on the ground. They're helping us to look at some of these and try to interpret some of what we're seeing, and also, talking about equipment that they would have used to carry children or carry supplies, and how they would have used some of the different equipment that they have, sort of like backpacks, but from like a strap from the head and carrying it at different locations, but maybe how that would affect the weight and the placement and some of the shifting of the body and other things. And also, I think just looking at the different stratigraphy you're talking about, where maybe people would have camped also, so maybe not in the wet areas, but in some of the upland areas or other areas. So I think it's been really great. And, I think folks from these groups, it's definitely part of them. And, that's they grow up with and see things and work in these resources. So often they'll point out, other prints or the things that we might have missed. So it's been a lot of fun and a great experience to work alongside these partners also.
Here's a question that's sort of been touched upon, but let's try it anyway. How do you know that the footprints are contemporary? That is, that you got the footprints in an area. How do you know that they all came at the same time, or whether it was 2 years later or 5 years later?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The simple answer is that footprints cross-cut one another, and they step on top of each other. And if you step, let's say that you get an animal, mammoth footprint or a sloth footprint, and you get a human stepping on top, you know the relative order and the sequence, you know that they are broadly contemporaneous. A footprint will not remain on the surface for very long. It has to be buried. And what tends to happen at this site is that you're getting rains, and probably maybe seasonal rains. It's getting muddy and wet. You're getting footprints, and those footprints may be left over several days, weeks, months, perhaps in the extreme cases. And then you're getting windblown sand coming across, these gypsum sands, and these gypsum sands fill in the footprints and preserve them. They're baked by the sun as well, and the salts. And then you get more mud and rain coming down, and that builds this layer cake. And so, yeah, we can't be absolutely confident that, you know, a surface was made in the same day. Sometimes we can, but in other times, there might be a matter of weeks or months between some of these tracks. But we're talking of months and weeks. And in the scale of things, when you're looking back at dating something that's 23,000 years, weeks is pretty tough charm to separate out. So, but to answer the question directly, is cross-cutting relationships. What steps on what, and how do they the two tracks interact? And you can often see that the track that's been stood on is soft. Is still wet and pliable in the way that it's deformed or shunted out of the side, for example. So with very, very good understanding of these sorts of interactions.
Yeah, and I think one of the best examples, a really amazing example, is the double trail trackway. In that one, you can actually see where a person walked out, and then looks like the sloth noticed the person, spun around and stepped on top of the human footprint. And then on the way back, the person steps on top of the sloth footprint. So, you know, maybe a matter of hours or a day or so, a very short time. You can also see sort of where they slipped on the ground in the exact same spot. It's really neat. You can see the sloth stood back and slipped, looked like he caught himself, and the person slipped at that exact same spot. So the conditions were the same. And I think, to me, you know, the other thing that's really amazing is our Dolomite prints. You see Dolomite of all the different track makers, human and mammoth and sloth, but the Dolomite forms just under, you know, really specific conditions, and you know, basically it can't form today, so it formed, you know, thousands of years ago, but the conditions just had to be just right for that Dolomite to precipitate out. And that's, we see, you know, the Dolomite human and sloth and mammoth all at the same elevations in those same areas. So I think the environmental conditions are often, you know, have to be just right to form matching prints as well. And you can't get prints nowadays that match those in those prehistoric prints.
We've got a probably inevitable anonymous question about the dating of the Rupia seeds. Do you have any comments on this? So the question here is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that the argument is the dating of the seeds is potentially incorrect because of their association with certain mineral elements. Is this right? That would change their carbon composition?
It's generally referred to as a hard water effect. Now, the work we have done to date, we're fairly confident that the hard water effect is minimal. And when we put the first paper out that came out, the science paper that came out last September, one of the questions that was regularly asked by the review process, and we addressed those comments. And we're confident in our chronology. But you know what? Vance said it. Pre-Clovis sites come in for an awful lot of criticism, and people have very entrenched views about how old sites should be and what is and what isn't acceptable as a site. And it's very controversial. And that is just the way it is. And you know, everybody's entitled to their opinions. We're confident in our chronology, but we understand that we need to build community confidence. We need to go out there and build community confidence in the dates across the community. And that takes work. And we're doing work all the time, and Jeff Pagati and Kathleen Springer are leading a huge work program at the moment to do further dating on the site. And that's really very promising. And they will, in time, bring forward work. But there is one of those things that we tend to forget now, and it's called the pandemic. And, very terrible that it was, but it really hit the research progress at sites like this. I mean, we didn't get onto the site for the best part of 2 years. So, we're playing catch up, and there will be more work, more publications to come. It's not a debate I really want to get into now, but I understand and we appreciate as a team the concern of the community as a whole, and we're working to address it. And if you watch this space, we will address it. And there we go. Watch this space.
Thank you for that. There are two sort of related questions, and I don't know if this is in Vance's territory. I'll sort of put them together. These results support the possibility that Pendejo Cave, I know you may know about, had human occupation at about the same time or earlier. Does that seem plausible to you?
The White Sands Locality 2 site doesn't make the record at Pendejo better or worse. And there are a whole host of problems, serious problems with that site having to do with mixing and whether or not the broken stone is in fact artificial. And that's something that this question comes up a lot, and it's something that you have to keep in mind, that each site lives or dies on its own. It doesn't tell us anything about the reliability of other sites. And a good example of this goes all the way back to the early history of archaeology. There was this huge debate about American Paleolithic, the Trenton gravels along the east coast of Delaware, I guess. When the Folsom site was discovered, and this was, of course, the discovery that changed everything because it was firm evidence of humans and Pleistocene fauna, changed the archaeological record. That didn't change the problems with Trenton. So our discoveries don't make other sites better or worse. Each site has to stand on its own. So I don't think it has any, in my opinion, it doesn't improve the cave story.
Okay, I'm skipping over. We've got 40 questions at the moment. They're sort of coming in thick and fast. A lot of them just have to do with whether you found artifacts, extinct animal bones, that sort of thing. I think you've already answered that. Here's an interesting question from Chris. It says, thanks for the terrific work and fascinating conversation. Strictly speaking, are the dates terminus post quem, time after which dates? I don't even, is it known when lakes and wetlands dried up to create the landscape that's present today? Are the kinds of footprints found here and elsewhere connected to footprints depicted in rock art? Well, that's a whole other thing. Anyway, good luck with ongoing research, writing, and preservation efforts.
You're off, Matthew.
I think the key thing about this is that each of the different layers is dated in itself, and these footprint horizons are bracketed with time after and time before dates, and each of the layers, or almost all the layers, have that pair of dates associated with them. So I think that answers that question. And there is a fantastic paleoclimate story to be brought out from White Sands, and how it links to large-scale climate change at the end of the Pleistocene. And that, again, is work that Kathleen Springer and Jeff Pagati are leading on behalf of the team.
I'll add on to that. We know surprisingly little about the lake record. We've been working on it. It's been one of my interests. Other people have worked on it, but it's looking like the initial phases of erosion of the lake beds to create the White Sands dune system was in the range very roughly of 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, maybe earlier, but beginning about the time when you see the more obvious occupation records like Clovis and Folsom, is when you had this major change from a lake building up to a lake drying out and starting to build the dune system.
Great, thank you. Well, I've just been cued by staff that we have passed through the 75-minute mark. So I just want to end that Paul Ryer is the head of SAR Scholar Programs, left this message: wonderful work. The team should submit a proposal to hold a seminar here at SAR. I can only second that emotion and hope that we'll hear more from you. Thanks to the three of you, David, Vance, and Matthew. We really appreciate your contributions. It's been a great conversation. And I'm sure that all the hundreds of people who watch us are looking forward to the subsequent research when you make that public. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.